It was 2 weeks before the annual family reunion, a time the children looked forward to all year. Mr. John's house was a whirlwind of activity, laughter, arguments, and the thought of tiny feet running across the wooden floors. This year's journey to the village had everyone excited. The children loved the endless fields, the fresh air that carried the scent of wildflowers, and the nights filled with stories under the starlit sky. But this year would be unlike any other, a journey marked not by joy, but by something much darker. Clara, Mr. John's wife, bustled around the house, packing clothes and preparing snacks for the trip. She was meticulous, checking and rechecking everything, but her mind was weighed down by something more than the packing list. "John," Clara called out, her voice laced with urgency. "Can we take a moment to pray before the trip? Just 2 minutes." John leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Clara, we've done this trip 100 times. Do you think a prayer will make the road smoother?" Clara stopped folding clothes and looked at him. "It's not about the road, John. It's about us, about being safe." John waved her off, laughing. "Relax, Clara. We'll be fine. The car's ready. The bags are packed. What could possibly go wrong?" Clara sighed. She didn't want to push him further. She had learned long ago that John was a man of his own mind. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. The stranger's warning. The night before the trip, John was driving home from work. The road was quiet, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. As he turned onto the last stretch of road, he saw her, a frail, old woman standing by the roadside, her hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. John slowed down, curiosity mingling with unease. Rolling down the window, he asked, "Ma'am, do you need a ride?" She nodded, her face tired but composed. "If you're going my way, I'd appreciate it." John unlocked the passenger door, and she climbed in, clutching a small woven basket. For a while, they drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. Then, without warning, the woman spoke. "Son," she began, her voice soft but steady, "your journey tomorrow, it will not be like the others." John frowned. "What do you mean?" The woman turned to him, her eyes sharp and penetrating. "There is danger ahead. If you must travel, prepare your spirit. Gather your family. Seek blessings. The road is not as it seems." John laughed, a deep, hearty laugh that filled the car. "Mom, I've made this trip every year. Nothing has ever happened, and nothing will." The woman didn't flinch. "Even the safest path can change, my son. Take heed." They arrived at her stop, and as she stepped out, she looked at John one last time. "Thank you for the ride. Remember what I said." John watched her disappear into the shadows, her words lingering in the air. He shook his head. "People and their superstitions," he muttered, driving away. The day of the journey. The morning of the trip arrived, and the house buzzed with excitement. Bags were piled high, and the children could barely contain their joy. Clara, however, felt a heaviness she couldn't shake. "John," she said quietly, "before we leave, can we take a moment together as a family? Just to reflect and give thanks." John groaned. "Clara, we're going to the village, not some life-altering expedition. Can we skip the drama?" Clara didn't argue. She gathered the children in the living room, guiding them through a simple moment of gratitude. Even as she whispered a prayer under her breath, she felt the weight of unease pressing down on her. Outside, John started the car. The engine roared to life, then sputtered and died. Frowning, he tried again. The same result. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, stepping outside. "I don't know," John muttered, checking the engine. Everything seemed fine, yet the car refused to start. Clara's voice was calm but firm. "Maybe it's a sign. a sign. John scoffed. Clara, it's a car, not a prophecy. But as the minutes turned into hours, and the car remained uncooperative, John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The bus hummed along the winding road, its passengers lulled by the rhythmic vibration of the engine. The children played with a deck of cards, their laughter filling the space. Yu sat quietly, her hands clasped together, her eyes scanning the trees that blurred past. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread, as if something unseen was following them. Suddenly, a loud bang jolted everyone awake. The bus swerved violently to the side of the road, passengers screaming as the driver fought to regain control. With a screech, the bus came to a stop, tilting slightly in the dusty ditch. What happened? Mr. John shouted, his heart racing. The driver wiped his brow, looking shaken. Tire burst, he muttered, stepping out to inspect the damage. The passengers spilled out after him, some shaking their heads, others cursing under their breath. The sun was blazing overhead, and the dusty road stretched endlessly in both directions. The driver squatted by the blown tire, muttering to himself. It'll take some time to fix this. Mr. John groaned, his irritation growing. Of all the days, he muttered. Yu, however, stood still, her eyes fixed on the horizon. There was something about the silence of the road, something unnerving. John, she said softly, I think we should pray again. Mr. John snapped, enough with the prayers, Yu. It's just bad luck. Let's not make it a big deal. But as the minutes passed, the unease in the air grew thicker. A strange wind began to blow, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. The passengers looked around, confused and uneasy. The omen. One of the older women on the bus pointed to the sky. Do you see that? She asked, her voice trembling. Everyone turned to look. A flock of black birds circled overhead, their cries piercing and dissonant. It was unnatural, almost menacing. Something is not right, the woman whispered, clutching her scarf tightly. The driver, visibly uncomfortable, hurried to replace the tire. Let's get this over with, he muttered. But before he could finish, a car approached from the opposite direction, its headlights flashing urgently. The driver slowed down and rolled down his window. You need to turn back, the man in the car shouted. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. What are you talking about? The bus driver asked, confused. There's been a terrible accident up ahead, the man said, his voice shaking. A truck overturned on the road. It's completely blocked. And he hesitated, looking over his shoulder as if afraid to say more. People are saying they saw something strange. Something not human. The passengers gasped, exchanging nervous glances. The choice. Yu stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. We need to turn back. This is a warning. Mr. John rolled his eyes. Warnings. From birds and strangers. This is just a coincidence, nothing more. But the other passengers began to murmur in agreement with Yu. Maybe she's right, one man said. It's better to be safe. The driver, torn between the pressure from Mr. John and the growing fear among the passengers, sighed. All right, we'll turn back. As the bus slowly reversed, the whispers in the wind grew louder, almost like a chorus. Yu closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, her hands trembling. When they finally reached a junction, the bus turned onto a different route. It was a longer path, but it avoided the area where the accident had reportedly occurred. The revelation. Hours later, the bus finally arrived at the village. Exhausted but relieved, the passengers disembarked, thanking the driver and one another for their patience. As they entered the village, they were met with a chilling sight. At the center of the square stood a group of villagers, their faces pale with fear. What's going on? Mr. John asked. An elder stepped forward, his voice grave. A terrible tragedy happened today. A bus traveling from the city overturned after being hit by a truck. Everyone on board did not survive. The passengers froze, their blood running cold. That could have been us, one woman whispered, her voice breaking. Mr. John stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing. For the first time, he felt the weight of something greater than himself. He turned to Yuyu, his face pale. Maybe you were right. Yuyu placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression both calm and resolute. We were saved for a reason, John. Never underestimate the power of faith. The price of protection. Yuyu knelt beside her husband's bed, her hands trembling as she clasped them together in prayer. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady. Thank you, Lord, for sparing his life. I know you have a plan for us. Mr. John groaned, his eyes fluttering open. The pain etched on his face was unbearable, but the sight of his wife and children brought a faint smile to his lips. I thought we were gone, he whispered, his voice raspy. Yuyu gripped his hand tightly. You're still here, John. We're all here. That's what matters. As the doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him, Yuyu couldn't shake the feeling that their survival was nothing short of a miracle. She replayed the moments before the crash in her mind, the driver's panic, the screams, and the overwhelming sense of calm that had washed over her when she cried out for divine intervention. But far away in the village, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. The wicked mask. Mama Amoka paced her small mud hut, her hands wringing nervously. The news of the accident had sent ripples through the village, but no details had emerged about who had survived. She had wailed and cried in public, her performance convincing enough to draw sympathy from the villagers. Oh, my son. She had cried earlier, tearing at her wrapper. Why would this happen to him? But now, alone in her hut, her face twisted into a dark smile. Finally, she muttered under her breath. They won't overshadow my sons anymore. This year, the village will see who truly deserves the spotlight. Her confidant, Mama Is, entered the hut, her face pale. Amoka, have you heard the latest? She whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone might overhear. Mama Amoka's smile faltered. What is it? They survived, Mama Is said, her voice trembling. Yuyu and the children are unharmed. And John is alive, but his legs, she trailed off, shaking her head. Mama Amoka's heart sank. No, that's not possible. The witches promised. They are saying it's a miracle, Mama Is interrupted, her voice rising. That God himself protected them. Mama Amoka felt her knees buckle, and she sank onto a stool. Her plan, her carefully laid scheme, had failed. Worse, if anyone discovered her involvement, she would be shunned or worse. A village divided. Word of the accident and the family's survival spread quickly. In the village square, groups of people gathered to discuss the miraculous events. Some marveled at the family's escape, calling it a testament to God's power. Others whispered about the dark forces that might have been at play, their eyes darting toward Mama Amoka's hut. Do you think she had something to do with it? One woman murmured to another. I wouldn't be surprised, her companion replied. She's always been jealous of John's success. As the rumors grew louder, Mama Amoka's isolation became more apparent. People avoided her, their once friendly greetings replaced with cold stares and whispered accusations. The return home. Weeks later, Mr. John was discharged from the hospital. Though confined to a wheelchair, his spirit remained strong. Yuyu and the children supported him every step of the way, their bonds stronger than ever. When they arrived in the village, a crowd had gathered to welcome them. The villagers cheered, their joy mingled with awe and curiosity. As Yu wheeled her husband into the square, an elder stepped forward. "We heard about the accident," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "And we thank God for sparing your lives. Truly, His hand was upon you." Yu nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We are alive today because of His mercy. And I believe this is a reminder for all of us to trust in His plans, even when we don't understand them." In the crowd, Mama Amoka watched silently, her face pale. She avoided their eyes, her guilt weighing heavily on her. For the first time, she realized the true cost of her envy, not just her shame but the nearly devastating consequences of her actions. The lesson learned. As the days passed, life in the village slowly returned to normal. Mr. John adapted to his new circumstances with remarkable strength, becoming an inspiration to those around him. Yu, ever the pillar of faith, continued to lead her family with grace and humility. Her unwavering belief in God's protection had not only saved them but had also brought the village closer together, reminding everyone of the power of unity and faith. And Mama Amoka. She retreated into the shadows, her heart heavy with regret. Though she never confessed her role in the events, she carried the burden of her actions for the rest of her days, a silent reminder of the dangers of jealousy and the power of forgiveness. The power of prayer and redemption. The children huddled close to Yu as she knelt by Mr. John's hospital bed. Her hands clasped tightly, tears streamed down her face as she cried out to the heavens, "Lord, you saved us from the accident. Please, don't take my husband. Let him live. Let him have another chance." The room was heavy with silence, save for the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Mr. John's injuries were severe, and the doctors worked tirelessly through the night. By morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the hospital windows, Mr. John stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Though weak and in pain, he was alive. The news of his survival spread quickly, and Yu's heart swelled with gratitude. She couldn't stop thanking God, her prayers now filled with joy and reverence. Later that day, as the family gathered in the hospital room, a soft knock came at the door. The old woman whom Mr. John had helped earlier entered, her steps slow but purposeful. Her presence filled the room with a strange calm, and her eyes sparkled with wisdom. Standing by Mr. John's bedside, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "Do you remember me?" Mr. John nodded weakly, his eyes filled with recognition. "Yes, Mama," he whispered. The old woman sat down, her gaze piercing yet kind. "I warned you," she began. "I told you not to go to the village this Christmas. I urged you to pray and fast, but you did not listen." Her words hit Mr. John like a wave. He swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. The old woman's voice softened but remained firm. "If not for your wife's prayers, you and your children would be gone by now." Mr. John's eyes filled with tears. He turned to Yu, who stood silently, her hands still clasped as if in perpetual prayer. The old woman continued, her words like arrows of truth. "Your stepmother, Mama Amoka, and the witches of the village cursed you. They planned your destruction, but God's plans are greater. Your wife's prayers built a shield around you and your children. It was her faith that saved you." Mr. John broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was a fool," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't listen. I didn't pray. I ignored every warning." The old woman placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Let this be a lesson," she said. "Never underestimate the power of prayer. And never ignore the warnings of God. He speaks, but we must listen." A changed man. From that day, Mr. John was a changed man. Once discharged from the hospital, he returned home with a renewed spirit. Every morning, he was the first to gather his family for prayers, kneeling beside Yu and leading with humility. On Sundays, he was the loudest voice in the church choir, his gratitude pouring out in every hymn. He became a living testament to the power of faith and the mercy of God. As for the village, Mr. John never returned for Christmas. The memories of the betrayal and the knowledge of his stepmother's actions kept him away. He focused on building a life filled with gratitude and humility, cherishing every moment with his family. Years later, after Mama Amoka passed away, Mr. John finally visited the village again. This time, he arrived not with grandeur but with a humble heart and a spirit of forgiveness. The villagers welcomed him warmly, their whispers replaced by admiration for the man he had become. A tale of faith and wisdom. The story of Mr. John's accident and miraculous survival spread far and wide. It became a lesson for many, a reminder that prayer is the strongest weapon against unseen dangers and that not everyone rejoices in your success. As for Yuyu, she remained the quiet hero of the tale, her unwavering faith and steadfast prayers the cornerstone of her family's survival.